The film opens with Ryan, a man who looks like an older version of John Connor, stepping out of an airport somewhere in Latin America, struggling to communicate with the local taxi drivers. He finally spots a driver waiting for him. Inside the car, he receives a message from Jack, apologizing for not meeting him personally and providing the code to his house. Ryan makes himself at home, enjoying a quiet dinner while waiting. When Jack finally arrives, he reveals that the house isn't actually his. It's a temporary rental provided by an agency for an upcoming event. The two old friends reminisce about their past and their shared profession as chefs. The next morning, Jack invites Ryan for a scenic morning run before they take a drive into the nearest town, where poverty lines the streets. Stopping at a small eatery, they continue their conversation over food. Soon, they are joined by Alice, a tourist exploring exotic destinations. To settle a friendly debate over who is the better cook, they challenge her to a blind taste test. She samples the same dish from both of them, ultimately declaring Ryan the winner. Later, after a swim in the pool, Ryan jokingly swipes Jack's watch, the same watch Jack once lost to him in a card game. But despite his small victory, he feels an underlying tension when Alice chooses to spend the night with Jack instead of him. His frustration grows the next morning when he receives a threatening message, a reminder that no matter how far he runs, his past will catch up to him. Jack casually mentions that he took Alice to a hotel and now has work to do, leaving Ryan alone. Oddly enough, Ryan doesn't mind. He seizes the opportunity to log into Jack's bank account through his laptop, discovering that his friend has over £1.5 million in his account. With a heavy sigh, Ryan logs out and wipes the browsing history. That evening, after Jack returns, the two share dinner by the pool, smoke some and ponder the meaning of life. But the next morning, everything changes. Ryan finds Jack hanging from a rope, dead. Processing the shock, a cunning plan begins to form in his mind, one that could solve all of his problems. With careful precision, he lays out a plastic sheet, cuts Jack down, and resets his phone to factory settings. He then calls the bank, pretending to be Jack, claiming to have suffered memory loss after an accident and requesting a password reset. Luckily, he has Jack's bank card on hand. But there's a catch. He must visit the bank in person in London with valid ID to gain full access to the account. Thinking fast, Ryan orders a fake driver's license from a Chinese website using Jack's name but his own photo. He then books a flight to London. Meanwhile, his creditor, the man he owes a massive debt to, calls again, threatening harm to Ryan's mother. Desperate, Ryan buys himself another week, promising an extra £50,000 on top of what he already owes. With time running out, he gets to work covering his tracks. He drags Jack's body to a nearby lake, tying weights to it before letting it sink beneath the water. After dragging his friend's body far enough into the water, Ryan does to him what Disney did to the Star Wars franchise. He sinks it to the bottom. The next day, his creditor changes his mind. He now demands £50,000 within 2 days, or Ryan's mother will be joining his grandmother and the rest of the family in heaven. Desperate, Ryan starts calling everyone he knows, promising to return the money doubled, even tripled. But no one is willing to take that risk, knowing his history with gambling. Returning home from town, Ryan finds unexpected visitors, Imogen and Maurice, event organizers from the agency. They mistake him for Jack, and Ryan, quick on his feet, plays along, even requesting an advance payment. Lucky for him, the fee for this event is a whopping £300,000. Imogen transfers the money directly to his creditor's account, then asks if everything is ready for the event. Ryan, having no clue what's supposed to happen, starts asking leading questions to piece things together. He soon learns that the dinner is tomorrow, and he hasn't prepared a thing. Frustrated, Imogen insists they visit a church to pick out 2 meat options from among the parishioners, people who take care of their health. The time for screening them for diseases and drugs has already passed, and that's when it finally clicks. Ryan now understands why Jack was making so much money per dinner and why he always seemed weighed down by guilt. He wasn't cooking ordinary meals. He was preparing something far more disturbing. Imogen makes it clear, if he doesn't serve the long-legged pig by tomorrow, his own time on Earth will be cut short. Realizing he has no way out, Ryan agrees. To calm his nerves, Imogen lays out the numbers. The agency is responsible for about 75 deaths a year. 50 of them are eaten, while the rest are collateral damage. But part of the profits go toward improving the infrastructure of the community, funding essentials like clean water, compared to oil companies, where over 100 workers die annually. Not to mention the environmental damage, this operation seems almost sustainable. Not knowing who to choose, Ryan randomly points at a young woman and her mother. He and Morris quietly tail them through the city, but when the women reach their neighborhood, they lose track of them. Just then, a local mechanic, Jose, notices the lost pair and offers to help. Maurice glances at Ryan, silently confirming that Jose will do just fine. He leads the man toward their car, claiming it broke down. As Jose crawls underneath to check, Maurice calmly attaches a silencer to his pistol and shoots him. They're about to drag the body away when a patrol car pulls up with the same police officer they saw at the church and the two women they had been following. Thinking fast, Maurice introduces himself as an assistant architect, claiming they're scouting locations for a new hotel. Satisfied, the officer lets them go. Back at the house, they decide to settle for just one body to avoid further complications. Together with Imogen, they haul the corpse into a hidden basement, where Maurice strings it up by the legs. Now, it's Ryan's turn to step up. Under the watchful eyes of his employers, he hesitates, then picks up a knife. With no other choice, he slits the man's throat, watching as the blood drains out. Leaving Ryan alone to work on the body.
Oh, and make sure that you have his tongue.
Imogen and Maurice head off to prepare the house for their high-profile dinner guests. After butchering the body covered in blood, Ryan heads to wash away both the stains and his sins, while Maurice carries out trays of their grotesque delicacies. But there's at least one piece of good news. His package from China has arrived. Inside, he finds the fake driver's license. Comparing it to Jack's real ID, Ryan makes sure the forgery is convincing before quietly gathering his things and slipping out to the car. Under the puzzled stares of the gardeners, he starts driving away, but in his panic, he accidentally hits one of the workers. The crash draws Morris's attention. Thinking fast, Ryan lies, saying the handbrake failed. But Morris, unfazed, reminds him that the organization has long arms. If Ryan runs, they will find him. As they push the car back into place, Ryan starts probing. He asks how someone like Maurice can live with a job like this. More importantly, how does one quit without ending up 6 feet under? Maurice shares a story. Once, a woman asked for a private meeting with management instead of taking her end-of-year bonus. After that, she sent Maurice a letter saying she had officially resigned and was now a personal chef for a wealthy family. He never heard from her again. Realizing that escape isn't an option, Ryan gets to work on the menu. He finalizes it with Imogen, and with just 3 hours until the first course, begins cooking. By nightfall, the first guests start arriving, dressed in elegant evening attire. But the sophisticated atmosphere is suddenly interrupted by the arrival of the police, Officer Gallia and Detective Ruiz. They're here to ask about the disappearance of Jose. Imogen welcomes them with a polite smile, sticking to the cover story about the construction business. But getting rid of Detective Ruiz won't be so easy. The missing man was his nephew, and he's taking this case personally. Imogen leads the officers to Ryan, who plays along. Cooking is just a hobby, he claims. By trade, he's an architect, and if needed, he can even drive a cab on the side. Ruiz, sharp-eyed and skeptical, tests him with a few casual questions, looking for inconsistencies. Meanwhile, Imogen, always thinking ahead, invites him to stay for a meal. With cruel irony, she offers him a bowl of soup, made from none other than his missing nephew. While the detective eats, Imogen pulls Ryan aside. Furious, she scolds him for his sloppy act. The agency has 3 specific protocols in case of police involvement, and he's failing at every one of them. His lack of knowledge about architecture is putting the whole event at risk. As more guests arrive and the first course is served, Ruiz finishes his meal and prepares to leave. But just as he's about to step out, something clicks in his mind. Imogen had casually suggested that Jose might have gone on a sudden, unplanned trip. That phrase lingers in Ruiz's head. It's the exact wording used in emails sent by young people who mysteriously disappear in the area. Emails that always arrive a few weeks later, reassuring their families that they're fine. And just like that, Ruiz stops at the door, his instincts telling him something isn't right. Considering everything he just learned, details he was unaware of since he worked in another city, Detective Ruiz decides to stay and get to the bottom of things. As he and Officer Gallia exchange pleasantries with the guests and prepare to leave, one of them unexpectedly invites them to join the dinner. Ruiz accepts the offer, while a clearly irritated Imogen pulls the overly hospitable guest aside for a private word. The man explains that he enjoys the thrill, the risk of getting caught, the possibility of being exposed. He lives for the danger. Before Imogen can deal with him, another unplanned problem arrives. Alice, the wandering tourist from before, shows up at the house. Imogen tries to send her on her way, but Alice asks to use the restroom, unwilling to room in the pristine garden with a less than graceful moment. With no other option, Imogen lets her in and leads her toward the kitchen, instructing Ryan to take care of her. Meanwhile, she sees Officer Gallia off, but there's a problem. Imogen believes Ryan is. It's a van pulling up. The doors open and young girls are led out, among them Maria, Kuka's missing sister. Before he can react, a garrote tightens around his throat. A guard tries to strangle him from behind, but Chapman isn't an easy target. He fights back, breaking free and knocking the man out cold. Slipping into the shadows, he follows the traffickers, keeping out of sight. The place is swarming with armed men. Japanese Yakuza, just as he suspected. Back in the favelas, the massacre continues. One of Santo's men spots a group of Yakuza in sleek black suits leading children toward a vehicle. Instinctively, he steps in to stop them. Santo, ever the manipulator, commends his officer for his bravery before casually drawing his gun and executing him on the spot. The Yakuza are free to go. With the situation handled, Santo makes a call to his employers. The woman on the other end assures him that his payment will be waiting at the port. Then she dials another number. Her boss, Hiramoto. There's a problem. The American is getting in the way, and it's time to eliminate him. As she relays this, Lemma, the man from the nightclub, stands before Hiramoto, awaiting judgment. The mistake of letting his documents fall into Chapman's hands was costly. One swift slice of a samurai sword later, and Lima is dead. Meanwhile, Chapman moves deeper into enemy territory. It doesn't take long for Hiramoto's men to spot him. He takes on 5 at once, using nothing but his fists and a stolen briefcase. But before he can finish, Santo and Bororo step in, guns aimed. They demand the briefcase. Gunfire alerts Katarina and her partner, who arrive just in time to disrupt whatever Santo had planned. Forced to maintain appearances, the corrupt detective plays along, following Chapman as he leads them to the room where the kidnapped girls were being held. But it's empty. The victims have already been moved. Frustrated, but undeterred, Chapman hands over the briefcase, knowing the documents inside link the Yakuza to human trafficking. Santo insists on taking the evidence into custody. It's only as Chapman turns to leave that the realization hits him. He never mentioned Lima's name. That means Santo already knew. Something clicks. Santo is in on it. Chapman immediately tells Katarina to check on Cindy at the hospital while he follows the detective. Hidden inside Santo's car, he watches as the man drives to the port. Meanwhile, Katarina arrives just in time, seconds before a hired assassin can finish what they started. The killer barely has time to react before Katarina takes them down. At the port, Chapman watches from the shadows. Santo stands with Yakuza associates as the kidnapped children are ushered into a storage warehouse, awaiting transport to Japan. It's all the confirmation he needs. Calling Ridley, he reports everything, but his old friend warns him against acting alone. Chapman doesn't listen. He never does. Using every bit of his military training, he moves unseen through the port, taking out guards one by one. His brutal efficiency turns the tide in his favor. But then, Santo. The two lock eyes, guns drawn. A firefight erupts, ending with Chapman pushing a forklift into the corrupt detective, pinning his leg. Before he can finish the job, Bororo blindsides him, knocking his weapon loose. The enforcer launches into a brutal capoeira attack, but Chapman fights smarter. Fancy flips and acrobatics don't mean much when raw power and precision take over. Santo frees himself from the wreckage and joins the fight. Still, even together, they struggle to take Chapman down. Then Hiramoto steps in, wielding his katana. The Yakuza boss moves with deadly grace, slicing Chapman's arm, forcing him on the defensive. Now, it's 3 against 1. Santo lunges with a knife, but in a swift counter, Chapman turns the blade back on him, driving it deep into Bororo's leg instead. A moment later, he knocks Santo unconscious with a brutal punch. Then, he rips the detective's chain from his neck and drives it into his chest, straight to the heart. Only Hiramoto remains. Chapman grabs 2 steel pipes, using them to block and redirect the sword's deadly slashes. He twists, locking the blade in place, directing it toward the Yakuza boss's throat. Just when it seems like he has the upper hand, Hiramoto's hidden blade flicks out from his sword's hilt, stabbing Chapman in the gut. That was a mistake. Fueled by sheer determination, Chapman channels his last reserves of strength, delivering bone-crushing blows to Hiramoto's skull until the crime lord collapses. Nearby, Santo, bleeding out, tosses Chapman a key. It unlocks a locker containing records of every corrupt official tied to the operation, police, judges, even government figures. Santo, knowing his time is up, mutters that he did many terrible things. But Cindy wasn't one of them. As he takes his last breath, Hiramoto makes a final desperate move. Chapman doesn't hesitate. He empties several rounds into him, ending it once and for all. As he walks away, Chapman leaves a gun beside Santo's broken body, a final mercy. Ridley and the authorities arrive soon after. Chapman personally frees the kidnapped children. Cindy survives, but the damage is severe. She will need extensive medical treatment. Ridley offers to cover the costs on one condition. Chapman must work for him as an undercover operative. Ridley already knows the answer. Before he even accepts, Chapman is given a new identity. His old Marine call sign, Falcon.